Welcome to the 39th video in the Just In Case, a series sponsored by Quality and Equality, an OD consultancy firm based in Oxford, United Kingdom. And my name is Mei Ann Chung Judge, and I'm the founder of the company. We call it Just In Case. It's just in case we need to be reminded and refreshed or learn something new. This short video is a way for you to engage in a lifelong learning habit. And today we are again joined by my great colleague, Barry Johnson, who did video number 38. So this is part 3 and part 4. As you know, that Barry is the profound thinker and creator of the Polarity Map and all its principles and methodologies. And Barry has a unique kind of offering to the viewer because he's one of the few people that absolutely integrate both his head and his heart in his work. He's deeply passionate, not just about Polarity Map, but also how it's applied to society, to maintain civil society. And he absolutely uses his head in terms of his logical reasoning about how these wicked problems can be solved. And so today, in parts 3 and 4, Barry is unpacked why is it important for us to understand the genius and the benefit of the both or, not both and, but both or thinking, and lead us through a very helpful exercise to learn to distinguish something being a problem or polarity. So in part 4, Barry turns his attention to help us understand how we can use or and thinking to address poverty, racism, and sexism in the world. In time like this, I couldn't emphasize how important Barry's part 4 is. So it's a thorough and in-depth video filled with a lifetime of wisdom and reflection. So Barry, thank you again for using your life and the way that you think to provoke us to be better global citizens. So time over to you.
Thanks a lot, Mei Ann. So in part 3, we're going to focus on two things, the genius of or and the genius of and the question, is it a problem or a polarity, and how to tell the difference. And an important point I want to express right at the beginning is that the rejection of or thinking is an example of or thinking. So there are a number of people, when I teach them polarities, they get very excited about it and they assume what I'm talking about is moving away from or thinking and to and thinking as something better or superior. But that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about supplementing or thinking with and thinking, that both are essential. So as a matter of fact, or thinking and thinking are themselves a polarity, which show up on this polarity map. On the map, you can see the two poles. The left pole is or thinking and problem solving, and the other pole is and thinking with leveraging polarities. At the top of the map, we have the greater purpose is a healthy, safe world. And what I'm asserting is that we can supplement or thinking with and thinking, and when we do both well, it will contribute to a healthy, safe world. And if we focus on either one of them, either and thinking or thinking, we'll have an unhealthy and unsafe world. So let's just take a look at, first of all, the genius of or. Without or, we can't learn language. We have science, history, and art and morals. All of these things are a part of the genius of or. We can learn all of these things. We can be decisive when we have to make choices, and being effective at solving problems. So or thinking is absolutely essential. It's basic to life. It's basic to creating a culture. We teach our children, when we teach our children language, we teach them words. What do they mean? So we point to our nose and ask, or their nose. I point to the nose on my child when they're learning language. I point to their nose and ask them, "What's that?" And they'll say nose. And then I'll point to their ear, touch their ear, and say, "What's that?" And they'll say ear. What they're doing is they're solving basic problems, which is what it's what language is. We have all these words, and so it's a wonderful learning to distinguish this from that, learning to solve problems very complicated problems or simple problems. It's absolutely essential to life. We can't do without it. And so, what are action steps we can do to make sure that we hold on to the benefits of or thinking as we look at and thinking? We can teach reading, writing, and subject matter to everyone. We can teach the values of right and wrong, and we can teach consequences. And we can teach problem solving and everything about the whole culture. It's wonderful. So there's a clear genius of or, but if we overfocus on this genius and on problem solving to the neglect of the genius of and, we get into what's called the tyranny of the or. And the problem with the tyranny of the or is it loses the benefits of the genius of and. So what does that look like? We have an inability to see ourselves and others more completely, and we end up judging ourselves and others harshly. We also have harmful polarization and power struggles, creating vicious cycles in which both sides lose. So we create these vicious cycles that show up in the downward arrow on the map, leading to an unhealthy, unsafe world. How would we know that we're getting into that area? What would be the early warnings? We have increased power struggles. We have increased identification of opposition as evil. We find this evil enemy and then we try to destroy them or lock them up. And we have increased comments like, you're either with me or against me. So we have this increased polarization and it becomes very cruel and dysfunctional. So there's a real downside to or thinking without its partner and thinking. So let's look at the upside of and thinking and leveraging polarities. What do we get if we can tap that dimension as well as solve problems? Well, we are learning to see ourselves and others more completely, and to love each other, to love our organizations, to love nature, to love our country. So it enhances our capacity to love by seeing dimensions of life more completely. Also, it allows us to create virtuous cycles with the natural tension that show up between two poles. It can become a virtuous cycle, and it leads to the greater purpose at the top. So there's a great upside to and thinking as well, but it's not a solution. We're not talking about removing or thinking in order to do and thinking. We're talking about supplementing with and thinking because we have to hold on to or thinking as well. If we don't, we get the tyranny of and. We have an inability to learn language, science, art, history, morals. We lose our whole culture. So other than that, there's no problem with and thinking alone. So it's a disaster, obviously. Also, just from day to day, working in organizations, we can end up being indecisive, vulnerable to inaction, and unable to solve problems. So and thinking is not a solution to the or problem. It is actually a supplement to the gift of or thinking. The beauty, the genius of or needs to be supplemented with the genius of and. So when we look at this, we are just reminded that we need to do both. And if we can do both, it can really help us with a healthy, safe world. So that begs the question, which is, how do we know whether we've got a problem or a polarity? So if it's a problem, we get the genius of the problem, we go into problem solving. If it's a polarity, we need to tap the genius of and thinking. So here's a couple of basic differences here. And this is leading up to a quiz where we'll get a chance to hopefully make sure you're sort of on top of this distinction. Problems to solve are two types generally. You have one right answer. So if I'm right, my opposition is wrong. If I say, who's the first president of the United States? Washington, Jefferson, Franklin, or Roosevelt. If I think it's Jefferson and my friend thinks it's Washington, we both look at each other and we know we can look at the history books and find out who's right. We will also know who's wrong. So one of the things that comes with our testing in schools and everything is we make the assumption if we're disagreeing with somebody and they're right, then we know we're wrong. Also, if we go inside and see, well, I think I'm right, then we assume they're wrong because we're assuming we can't both be right, which would be true if it was a polarity. So it's a problem to solve. We have one of them is we have one right answer in which if I'm right, then you're wrong. The other thing is we can have two or more right answers that are independent. There's more than one way to skin a cat. There's more than one way to do this. There's 4 or 5 ways we can do this. So there's multiple right answers, but if we choose one of those right answers, we don't have to include the others because we have solved it. So the polarities, however, polarities to leverage have 2 right answers that are interdependent. So in those cases, I and my opposition are not only both right, but we're each dependent on each other's truth over time. If you say we should inhale and I say we should exhale, not only are we both right, we need to do both. So let's take a look at that a little bit further. So we've got some contrast here. We've got a column of defined contrast for problems to solve and a column for polarities to leverage. So let's look in the upper left here. Problems to solve. One set of contrasts is that, first of all, they're not ongoing. There's an endpoint. They're solvable. Once you've solved it, what's 2 plus 2? It's 4. Okay, great. Then you've solved the problem. You can move on to another problem. However, if we look to the right, polarities to leverage, they're not ongoing. I mean, they are ongoing in contrast to problems to solve. There is no endpoint. They're not solvable in the sense that you can't choose one pole as a solution to the other pole. You can't choose inhaling as a solution to inhaling and exhaling. It just won't be sustainable. So they must be leveraged together over time. Another contrast, look over to the left, is problems to solve are independent alternatives. You can choose one and let the others go. However, if we look to the right, by contrast, polarities to leverage are interdependent alternatives. They definitely need each other over time. Again, to the left, problems to solve can stand alone. There's no need to include an alternative for the solution to work. However, with polarities to leverage, they can, if you look at this side, they cannot stand alone. The alternatives need each other to optimize the situation over time. So let's look at some examples. Problems to solve often contain mutually exclusive opposites. Should we promote Bill? If we're going to promote Bill, or are we going to promote Sally? Should we include, what should we include in our customer survey? Once we've answered those questions, we've got a survey. We don't have to create another survey. We've solved the problems. Should we buy a 200-ton press? When was the War of 1812? And also, should we remove one level of management? So there's all sorts of problems that we solve. And if we solve them, then the others go by the wayside. However, if we look to the polarities to leverage, they always contain mutually inclusive opposites. Tough love and gentle love. We need to focus on the individual and the team. We need to pay attention to cost and quality. Competing and collaborating. Work and home in our lives. So these are some examples of how they're contrasted. So let's take a look at the lenses that we can use when we're trying to identify whether something's a problem or polarity. The first question we can ask, the first 2 we can ask before we have a polarity map. The second 2 are assuming that we have built a polarity map, and then we can check again once our polarity map is built to see if we have a polarity. So the first 2 are the ones we're going to use for this survey that's coming up. First question is the difficulty ongoing like breathing? So what we do is we ask the question, are we likely to be dealing with this concern over time? Are we going to, over time, if we go back, if we look at cost and quality, okay? So for example, are we going to need to focus on cost and quality 5 years from now, 10 years from now? If the answer is yes, as we project into the future, If the answer is yes, then it's probably a polarity to leverage. So ongoingness, as best we can imagine, is this an ongoing issue? It's probably a polarity if it is. The second question is, are there two alternatives that are interdependent, meaning you can only focus on one pole for so long before you're required to focus on the other pole? Again, like inhaling and exhaling. You can only inhale for so long before you're required to exhale. You can only be physically active for so long before you need to have rest. You can only focus on cost for so long before you have to focus on quality. And the same with focusing on quality. You can only focus on that for so long before you're going to have to pay attention to cost. So those are the two primary questions. Now, once you have built a polarity map, you can ask the next two questions. Is it necessary over time for you to have both identified upsides? So if you can imagine the upsides, you can do it right in your head. But if you put a map and you write it out on a page and you write those upsides, then you ask the question, is it necessary over time to have both identified upsides? So the next one is, will focusing on one upside to the neglect of the other eventually undermine your efforts to move towards your higher purpose? Right? So in the metaphor for the marathon, if you want to run a marathon, right, is it necessary for you over time to both increase your endurance and let muscles build? Those are the two upsides. If the answer is yes, then it's probably a polarity. And will focusing on one upside to the neglect of the other eventually undermine your efforts to move towards a higher purpose? If you overfocus on endurance without focusing on rest, will it undermine your getting to run a marathon? Yes. If you overfocus on rest without any endurance focus, will that undermine your getting to run a marathon? Yes. So that's how you assess whether you've got a problem or a polarity. Let's look at this list. I'm going to give you a chance to respond to each of these 7 questions, these issues, and see whether you think it's essentially a polarity or a problem. And the 4 lenses are over on the left, but I'm going to ask you to just look at the 2, because we won't pretend to have a polarity map right now we're working with. So it's just going to be the two questions to find out if it's a problem or a polarity. So let's look at the first one. Where do we go for lunch? Sam likes Wanda's Wonder Bar, and Linda likes the nostalgic noodle. A clear conflict here. So the question is, do you think this is a polarity or a problem? And what is the criteria you use to make your choice? So I'm going to give you a second, okay? The first question, is this issue ongoing, like breathing? Where do we go for lunch? Wanda's Wonder Bar or the nostalgic noodle? Second, is there an interdependence between the two alternatives such that if we choose one alternative for the moment, we will be required to include the other alternative at some point in the future? So, do you think this first one is a problem or a polarity? What is your sense? Okay, so I'm identifying it as a problem to solve, because if you go to lunch at Wanda's Wonder Bar, there's no need for you sometime in the future to go to the nostalgic noodle. You don't have to go there. Or you could go to the nostalgic noodle. You don't have to go to Wanda's Wonder Bar. So one caveat about this point, some of you might put that you think it's a polarity because you're paying attention to the relationship. Now, this could be an underlying polarity. So if Sam and Linda are in a relationship, you might have an underlying polarity, which is, are we taking care of Sam's interests or are we taking care of Linda's interests? And over time, you might want to manage that polarity of taking care of Sam and taking care of Linda. So that's another polarity, taking care of the interests of each of them. And over time, you might then choose to go to both over time. But in terms of the immediate question, where do we go to lunch? It can be solved and there's no requirement to use the other choice. So the next problem. We have to get rid of our silo mentality. Let's break down the barriers and become an integrated team. Rah, rah. Okay, so is this a problem or a polarity? Look at the first 2 questions on the left. Is the issue ongoing like breathing? Is there an interdependence between the 2 alternatives such that if we choose one alternative for the moment, we will be required to include the other alternative at some point in time. So we have to get rid of our silo mentality. Let's break down the barriers and become an integrated team. So the question is, is it a problem or a polarity? If it's a polarity, what would you name the poles? If it's a problem to solve, you don't have to worry about it. But if it's a polarity, what might the pole names be? Okay, I'm suggesting this is a polarity. The silo is the downside of a pole, which is the end of the individual and team polarity. So you've got the individual and the team. If you overfocus on the individual to the neglect of the team, what happens is you get the isolated individual. You get a silo mentality. So in this case, it's a polarity because you have to, and the polarity could be individual and team, or it could be it could be France in the United Nations. We focus on France, or we focus on the United Nations. We want to become an integrated team as the United Nations, but we also want to take care of the individual country and respect that country's needs. Okay, how do we get to the top of this mountain? Okay, there could be a lot of disagreement and tension about that. How do we get to the top of this mountain? Do you think this is a problem or a polarity? And if it's a polarity, what would you say the polarity is? Okay, I'm identifying it as a problem. Now notice, you can have some conflict about how you're going to get to the top of the mountain, and you could have multiple ways to go. Some could say, well, let's hike. Some might say, well, I want to take a car. Others might say, well, I want to take a helicopter. So you've got multiple right answers for how to get to the top of this mountain. But once you've chosen the helicopter, then you don't need to hike and you don't need to take the car. You could have conflict and you could have multiple right answers. But just because you have multiple right answers and just because you have a conflict doesn't mean that you necessarily have a polarity. So conflict doesn't necessarily mean a polarity, nor does more than one right answer necessarily mean a polarity. With a polarity, you need to have interdependence, and so if you choose one thing, you're going to be required to use the other later. So let's look at number 4. We're becoming an international company. How do we get our people to think globally? So is that a problem or a polarity, do you think? There's clearly some tension. There's a desire to get a solution. What do you think? I identify this as a polarity. And by the way, all of these are examples that I have dealt with in talking with people about polarities. So in this case, it's another version of the part-whole polarity. And the polarity would be local and global. So we're in a company like the one I mentioned here, located in 46 countries. We want our people in our country, especially, to think globally as well as locally. And so the question is, if we get our company, everyone in our company, to focus globally to the neglect of focusing locally, is that going to be sustainable? And the answer is no. So what we need to do is focus locally and globally. And how do we make sure we do both? By the way, if we assume that thinking globally is a solution, we'll get a lot of resistance from people who value the importance of thinking locally. So the next one, should we merge with megacorporation? It would certainly help our capitalization. Do you think that's a problem or a polarity? Should we merge with megacorporation? It would help our capitalization. Okay, this one I'm suggesting is a problem to solve. The reason I'm suggesting it is because there's an either-or choice at the end of the process. Are we going to merge with megacorporation or not? We can decide to merge, and if we decide to merge, then we don't have to, there's no requirement that we unmerge later. Or if we decide, no, we're not going to merge, there's nothing inherent in that requires us to go ahead and merge later. So at basic level, this is a problem to solve, and you're going to make a decision through a lot of considerations. Now, while you're in that consideration mode, it might be helpful to look at some key polarities, which would inform your choice about whether you want to merge or not. And often, by the way, when I work with mergers and acquisitions, by the way, virtually all mergers or acquisitions, they're called mergers by the one that's doing the acquiring to soften the blow. But it's almost always actually an acquisition. So what happens is when you have a merger or an acquisition, or you're thinking about it, you could have one organization, for example, that is very good at centralization, highly coordinated, highly integrated system, and you've got another organization that wants to merge, and they are very decentralized, and their decision making is more flat, not as much top down. And as you look at it, you think, oh wow, these two cultures, that's a disaster to bring those two together. Well, it would be if you did it from an either or perspective. But if you did it from a both and perspective, you get the benefits of those who have all that centralized capacity and the benefits of those who have decentralized orientations and capacity. And they can really reinforce each other. And so it becomes a both and. So what looks, when you're looking at the front end, as a possible conflict could in fact be a real asset to both of them. Okay, number 6, how do we get union support for our major company-wide change effort? So what do you think? Is this a problem to solve, or is this a polarity to leverage? This is my answer to this. When I was looking at it, I saw a fundamental polarity to leverage. You might have seen also a problem to solve. So let's take a look at how you can see this from both angles. The way I was seeing it is when you are dealing with this question about getting union support for a change effort, you're dealing with the polarity of employee interests and company interests. And this polarity needs to be leveraged well for the company to be satisfied, and to get that union support, you need to make sure in that support that you're responding to the union's interests as well as the company interests. Now, whether you're a union shop or not, the underlying tension of this polarity shows up in all organizations, company interests and employee interests, even if you own the company. So you might have seen a problem to solve in here, which you're asking the question, look, if this is a one-off thing, this particular change effort is just a one-off change effort, then the question is, how do we make this change effort attractive enough to get union support? And once we have gotten union support, we have solved the problem for this support effort. So in this one, you could look at it two different ways. There, you could look at it as a problem to solve, and once you've got that solution for that change effort, you've solved it. And the other is this underlying polarity that needs to be leveraged in order to get to that solution. Let's look at the final one. Our Swedish partners have to talk to everyone before deciding. How do we get them to decide faster? Now, in this story, I was actually working with a company in which they had merged on a 50-50 merger a couple of years earlier, and they decided to unmerge later. And the reason is it has to do with this situation. So do you see this as a problem to solve or a polarity to leverage? What do you think? Okay. What I'm focused on here is an underlying polarity. And what it is being decisive and being inclusive. So it's being, or directive and participative in your decision makers. And when they talked about this, when I talked with both groups about this, the people from the United States, it was a United States-based company. So the people from Sweden, we're talking about the people from the United States, and they say, oh, you at the United States, you just have, you're just cowboys that just shoot from the hip. One person decides, immediately makes these quick decisions, and then they spend all their time trying to get people to support the decision that they've made alone. And so it's just a disaster. We don't believe in decisions that way. So that was their opinion. The upside of getting people involved, and the downside of just being overly directive and just making a decision without including people in the decision-making process. The United States managers said about the Swedes, those Swedes, they have decidophobia. You know, if you wanted to buy a new computer, they would have to have an office meeting to have everybody decide on the shape and the size of the computer. So they're being overly dramatic about the Swedes wanting to include people in decisions, and their message is that if people are included, it takes a little more time to include people at the front end, but the actual rollout becomes more effective, and it's smart when you've got collective decision. So they both have an important point about directive and participative decision making, and that will be something that is an underlying polarity. So you're getting a feel for what polarities are and how they look, and this is how you can tell the difference between them. So I hope you find it easier now to make those determinations going forward. So some new realities that show up in chapter 28 is, remember, there's 120 realities that show up in the book, and I want to just summarize what we've covered here. 3 of them show up in this chapter. There are 4 questions that can help us decide whether an issue is a polarity or a problem. Is the issue ongoing, like breathing? Is there an interdependence between 2 alternatives such that if we choose one alternative for the moment, we'll be required to include the other alternative at some point in time? And then, if you've got a polarity map, is it necessary over time to have both identified upsides within that polarity map? And finally, will focusing on one upside to the neglect of the other eventually undermine efforts to move toward your greater purpose? And 2 other points that were made at the end. Polarities always contain problems to solve. So if you're working with a polarity, you have all sorts of problems to solve. What are the names of the poles? What are the upsides? What are the downsides? What are the action steps? And what are the early warnings? So you've got all sorts of work to do in problems. Use your problem-solving capacities in order to leverage a polarity well. And problems to solve can be a part of a polarity, and they can have polarities within them. So you can have a polarity, for example, that we talked about with the person, whether you're going to merge or not. You can have underlying polarities that would help you solve whether you're going to have a merger or not. So these are just some important realities when you're looking with polarities or problems. So here are some questions that you might think about in relation to part 3. What is the tyranny of and? What is the tyranny of or? What is the action step to maintain the benefits of or thinking? What is one action step to maintain the benefits of or thinking? And what is one action step to maintain the benefits of and thinking? Finally, what are the 4 lenses to determine whether you are dealing with a problem or a polarity? So I hope you find these useful. Thank you. So we're at part 4 in this 4-part series on polarity thinking. In this part, we're going to focus on 2 things. One is how or with and helps us address poverty, racism, and sexism. And the other is how or with and helps us address the climate crisis. So let's look first at how or with and helps us address poverty, racism, and sexism. A polarity lens helps us understand why and how we create marginalized cultures, and it does it without blaming or condoning some individual or group as an evil source. This is a fundamental benefit of a polarity lens, because there is no evil source. There's no individual or group that is inherently evil. Looking for an evil source undermines our efforts to gain diversity, equity, and belonging. The problem with looking for an evil source is not just that it's a waste of time. It leads to us finding an evil source, and it ends up being either us or somebody else, and in either case, we end up being cruel to that identified evil source, and self-righteously cruel often. So I'd like to look at the whole notion of symptoms and root causes. So this is a figure 2 from chapter 30, and I'll give you a little bit of the background story. I was at a conference once making a presentation, and there was another person there, Dr. Victor Garcia, who was the head of the trauma center for Cincinnati Children's Hospital. And he was concerned because as the head of the trauma center, he kept seeing children at Children's Hospital coming in with knife wounds and gunshot wounds and other kinds of harm. And he was busy trying to take care of them. And he realized that these kids coming into the operating room at the trauma center were a symptom of a root cause that he needed to get a handle on. And so he came to this conference on systems thinking, and he was asking if he could get some help in dealing with the root cause, because it wasn't enough for him to just be looking at dealing with the root cause, like China getting shot. And China, by the way, she was shot a couple of times. She was just walking hand in hand with a friend. She's 9 years old. She was walking with a friend who was the target of a drive-by shooting. And in that shooting, he was killed, and she was paralyzed from the waist down, and she lost the sight of one eye. So a real tragedy, and it was a symptom of something. And so he was the neighborhood in which Cincinnati Children's Hospital sits is Avondale neighborhood. It's the most violent neighborhood in all of Cincinnati. So he's thinking, what can we do about improving the neighborhood so that these kinds of symptoms and tragedies are less likely to happen? And so if you look to the left from the arrow, from number 1, we start off with China being shot and paralyzed from the waist down. And Dr. Garcia's thinking, poverty and racism and its impact on this poor community in which we live, that's really a part of the problem as a root cause. But then what happens if we go from 2 to 3 and we look at poverty and racism itself as a symptom? And what might be underlying or a root cause to poverty and racism? And this is what happens in a lot of diversity work. It's like, well, let's look at not just look at the shooter in this case, but let's look at the systemic institutional practices and policies that they can be seen as a root cause of poverty and racism. But if we go to 5, what if systemic institutional practices and policies are themselves a symptom? Who is the source of, what is the cause of these systemic institutional practices and policies that end up with China getting shot and paralyzed? It leads to systemic racism and leads to her getting shot. And that usual quest often is, we're looking for an evil source that we must blame, we must convert, overpower, or destroy. We need to find this evil source and deal with them. What I'm suggesting is there is no evil source. Thus the line through the circle in 6. And the arrow that goes to the bottom, there is an alternative and that is or without and, or thinking without and thinking. So let me be clear about this. I'm not suggesting that I don't believe there is evil in the world or things we could call evil. I think that poverty, racism, and sexism are all evil results of systems that don't function well. And so, or thinking without and thinking. And so what I'm suggesting is that if we overfocus, we know that if we overfocus on one pole to the neglect of the other, we get the downside of the pole we overfocus on. What happens if we do that a number of times and we bring or thinking to a situation, and it's possible that the source of these evil results is an overfocus on one pole to the neglect of its other, and that landing on another pole in which you overfocus on it. So let's take a look at how that might be seen. So I'm suggesting that there are 4 values that we have which trigger some polarities, have underlying polarities, and those values are all absolutely essential, but they trigger polarities which, if mismanaged because of that value, without looking at the interdependent pair, leads us to poverty, racism, and sexism. The first value is solving problems. All of us want to be problem solvers, and we should be. We talked about problem solving and leveraging polarities in section 3 of this. Solving problems are important, they're great. So that's one. Another is the desire to protect. There's a natural desire of parents to protect our children, to protect our family, for example. There's a desire to protect the organizations we work in, and to make sure they survive to the benefit of all the stakeholders involved. Also, we want to protect our country. And in this desire to protect, we can spend just a fortune. The United States government, for example, just in terms of defense, spends more on our defense in order to protect us than the next 7 countries combined. So there's a lot of energy and a lot of investment in serving and protecting. So protecting is important for sure. We also want to provide. I want to provide for my family, for my kids, for my grandkids. And so the desire to provide is also something that's very powerful. We want to put, food on the table, and we want to put a roof over our heads. Another powerful value and desire is to belong. We want to belong to a group. We're very social. It's not just about us. It's about our family, or it's about various groups that we belong to. And belonging to that group is important. It's fun when we see the United Nations gather, or when we have the Olympics. And at the beginning of the Olympics, it's beautiful because you have all these people dressed in carrying their national flag, and they're walking into the stadium, and they're proudly belonging to their country, representing their country in the Olympics. So we love belonging, and it's very important. It's a deep need for all of us. So we want to solve problems. We want to protect those we love. We want to provide for those we love, and we want to belong and be included. A great set of stuff. So let's look at how those great things, just like inhaling is great, but without exhaling, it's not sustainable. These 4 things, without some interdependent pairing, leads to poverty, racism, and sexism. So the first one is or and and in the first place, which we talked about in section 3. Or and and. If we treat or with using the word or itself, so if we unconsciously believe that we need to just solve problems, which is the upside of or thinking, and we neglect and thinking, we end up creating vicious cycles. So solving problems is great, but without and thinking, it leads to vicious cycles and a downward spiral. This downward spiral is a disaster that lands on the next polarity. So it's a cumulative effect. By the way, since we've chosen or thinking, we bring or thinking to these next 3 values. And bringing or thinking to the next 3 values just compounds the problem and makes it an absolute disaster. So we bring vicious cycles to claiming power or sharing power, the power dimension. And the polarity is being able to claim power and share power. In our effort to protect, we often think, well, I need to get enough power to protect my country or my family from those who might harm them. So the desire to claim power in order to protect is huge. The problem is not with claiming power. The problem is with the notion that when I claim power, I have to claim power over. I can't both claim power and share power because power is a zero-sum game. So in my effort to claim power, if I assume there's only 10 elements of power, and I need to get most of them because I need to protect myself from the other, and I need to make sure that they have little or no power relative to the power that I have, so then I'm safe. So we end up wanting to claim power over others, and we don't entertain the possibility that we can claim power and share power. So if we go into claiming power without sharing power, this leads to an abuse of power. And it leads to having power over, creating a situation in which we have power over. And what we do with that power over ends up being abusive. So I give you an example in my own country, in the United States. As I'm white, male Norwegian ancestry. But white Europeans came to the United States, occupied by native peoples, and in our effort to protect and not seeing the possibility of effectively claiming power and sharing power, we ended up claiming power over. And we used that power over. We were able to militarily use that power to claim land for ourselves and relegate native peoples to reservations. So this is one example of racism and abuse of power in our history. Now, not only did we take the land from Native Americans for ourselves and send them to reservations, we also brought slaves from Africa to work in the land that we took from the native peoples, and incorporated slavery as a way to economically build our plantations and make wealth for ourselves. So we took the land from Native Americans, and we used free labor from with African slaves who came in chains. So it was very easy to have power over them because they claim, and we just purchased them and put them to work. Now this is the clear source of slavery and of racism. And so, by the way, what happens when we have won in the power struggle over power? When we have won, we have all sorts of things we can do with that power. One of the things we do is that we legitimize our claiming power over them by claiming ourselves to be better than them. We won in the power struggle between us because we're smarter, because we're stronger, because God's on our side, all sorts of reasons we give. And we can also then therefore claim that we're superior. The assumption is we won because we're better, we're superior. And we then define ourselves as civilized and them as savages. And we end up legitimating the cruelty of our treatment to them by dehumanizing them. We actually dehumanize them in the first place in order to take the land. And then we continue to dehumanize them as a way to legitimate the fact that we are claiming power over them. So this superiority dimension, that is military superiority, gets translated in superior in all sorts of ways. Another thing that happens is when you have claimed power over, is once you have done that, the same rationale that caused you to want to have the power in the first place causes you to want to keep it, because you're afraid if they were to gain power, then you're going to lose power. So you perpetuate it by creating laws with the power you've got to maintain the power. So, for example, during the slavery era in the United States, slaves could not be taught to read. Why would you have a law that slaves can't be taught to read? Because the ability to read English in the dominant culture, which was white European, in that dominant culture, that was an empowering act to teach slaves to read. So you couldn't teach them to read. Of course, they didn't have a vote. So there were the things that might empower them obviously get diminished because you can't share power. So this gets perpetuated even at the end of the Civil War, where slaves were freed. There were still ways, because the intention is still there to claim power over, to protect. You end up creating Jim Crow laws. You create new laws to maintain your power, and this gets perpetuated, continues right to this day, with this issue of claiming power without sharing power. So you've got the abuse of power. You got vicious cycles combined with abuse of power, and we continue on now to provide. When we look at providing, this natural desire to provide, if we look at it from the person who is claiming power and is unwilling to share it, in this process, I can create a lot of abundance for myself. An underlying polarity here is the part and the whole, the focus on freedom and equality. And so that's an underlying polarity. And if we focus on freedom without paying attention to equality, and we focus on claiming power without sharing power, it leads to perpetuating the dominant culture over the marginalized culture. And the dominant culture is able to create a lot of abundance for itself. And the assumption when you have this abundance is that if you were to seriously entertain providing basics for the marginalized, those whom you've marginalized, if you provide the basics for them, you join them, share power with them to make sure that we provide basics for all, the assumption is I'm going to have to give up the abundance that I have created for myself, for my family. And I'm going to lose the abundance. So, and if we look at what I'm talking about in terms of basics for all, I'm talking about water, food, shelter, work for a meaningful wage, basic health care. Those are the basics. And we can, with and thinking, we can in fact allow for abundance for some. Some people are going to have a big house. Keep your big house. It's fine. And we can provide basic shelter for everyone. You can have your fancy car and you can have your fancy boat. That's fine. We can also, however, provide basic transportation for everyone. You can have a high quality education, and we can provide basic education for everyone and access to high quality education for everyone. So this possibility of having abundance for some and basics for all is undermined when you connect them with or. And that's an unconscious bias. Just like the unconscious bias that we talked about in session 1, this organization, if you'll recall, the organization all agreed, the leaders, the followers, everybody agreed they wanted to go from silos to integrated teams, right? From autonomous business units to integrated teams. And they didn't go there, right? Why didn't they go there? Because they had an unconscious bias for or thinking and the assumption that they were going to lose what they valued if they actually pursued the other. They were going to lose their speed and entrepreneurship if they went to integrated business units. It would become a bureaucracy and slow. Here, what happens when we assume that we're going to apply basics for all, the upside of basics for all is that everybody has a decent place to live, that everybody has enough food to eat. That's the upside of basics for all. But the fear is, if we really went there, and this is an unconscious fear for most people, if we really went there, I couldn't keep my nice house. I couldn't, keep the abundance that I have. But in fact, that's possible. It can actually enhance your abundance. So it is possible to have basics for all and abundance for some. But if we assume we can't have basics for all, I need to protect my abundance for some with my power, and then what happens? It leads to gross inequality, which we see on the planet all over the place. And gross inequality comes from the creating dominant cultures by claiming power without sharing power, and creating marginalized cultures by the dominant culture, and then the dominant culture creating abundance for some parts of itself to the undermining of basics for all, which leads to gross inequality and poverty. Let's look at the final part of this step. So we bring vicious cycles, we bring power over and abuse of power along with gross inequality and abundance for some, and we look at the final dimension. Final dimension is about belonging. And here I'm talking about belonging. It's belonging like we want to be in a family, we want to be in our group. And one of the criteria for belonging is obeying the rules. So you can belong if you do this. If not, you can get expelled. You can be purged. You can be put in jail. You can be taken out of the regular community. And so there's a desire to belong for all of us. And one of the dimensions when we have an either-or mindset about belonging is that if you want to claim belonging for yourself, then you have to define others as those who don't belong. So I belong in this group and you don't belong. So there's an exclusion process that happens that makes me feel good because I'm in my group and you're not. But when we look at belonging from a more open perspective, we can belong to our group and we can belong to all humanity. It's like in the Olympics. We can belong to our individual country as we come in to compete, and we can compete with each other, and we can be one humanity celebrate that we all belong to. We can belong to all. So we can belong to the part and to all. But let me just share how this becomes more problematic in the belonging issue. And this shows up especially in our faith communities. All of our faith communities have some version of an all-loving God on the one hand, and the fact that we're accountable on the other hand. So this gets into the laws that we create. And so we need to obey those laws in order to belong. So what happens when we look at we look at just the accountable side, just the law side, without the fact that all are loved, and the mercy pole, if we look at justice without mercy, law without grace, all are accountable without all being loved. If we look at that pole, what happens is we think, oh, some laws are great and necessary. We have to have laws we agree to live by. Whether they're written or not, we have these rules, these mores, these 10 commandments or other sorts of laws. We have these laws to live by. If some laws are good, then on a continuum, more laws are better. Now you can see where this is headed. We can have more and more laws. The other thing that happens with laws is we think, well, laws need consequences. If you don't have consequences for breaking the laws, then the laws are meaningless. Now, if some consequences are helpful, then harsher consequences are probably more helpful. So we end up in the name of law, in the name of accountability, and in the name of justice, we end up over-focusing on justice to the neglect of mercy. We have too many laws, and we have too harsh consequences for the laws, and we find ourselves stoning a woman to death for being pregnant out of wedlock. Now, and we do it with self-righteous indignation. How did we get there? We got there by over-focusing on justice to the neglect of mercy, the fact that all are accountable, and we do it by membership. I'm a member of the group that doesn't do those things. So our membership fits with our obeying the laws. The problem is that when we get so many laws and such harsh consequences, in our fear of membership, we can't even own the fact that we have broken any of the laws. So we end up projecting what we can't own. I can't admit that this is a problem with me. And so what I do is I project what I can't own. And all of us are going to fall short, especially when we've got tons of laws and harsher consequences. We're all going to find ourselves falling short. And the stuff we can't own, we then project on somebody else. It's not me, it's them. Right? It's not the group I belong to, it's that group. So this leads to a projection on people, and there's two important elements to the projection, to what make projections useful and easy to do. The first is those I project on need to look different than me. So if they look different, then they're obviously not me. They need to be an obvious not me so people aren't confused. Is that me? No, that wasn't me, because it's them. So for me as a white male in the United States, who are the not me's that I can look to project what I can't own? So it's people of color, and so they're not me. How can you tell? Because I'm white and they're not. So I can project things I can't own onto people of color, which is racism, right? First, I've claimed power over them. I've claimed abundance for myself, and now I'm projecting what I can't own on them. By the way, this legitimates my claiming power over them in the first place and my holding on to my abundance. So ends up being just a very vicious process, and it just kind of shows up in the culture. So now I'm projecting what I can't own to them. I'm smart, they're dumb. I'm industrious, they're lazy. Whoever they are, I can project stuff onto them. So as a white person, I can project on people of color. And I own the mechanisms of projection, by the way, which are the media. So as part of the dominant culture, we can project what we want to whatever we don't want on a marginalized culture. As a man, I can project on women. I'm strong, they're weak, or whatever. But I can do this projection, and it readily happens if I can't own it. So how do we deal with? So this is what this looks like if we show it on the screen here. If we neglect or lose appreciation for, lose the understanding that we are all loved, and we overfocus on being accountable, and we can't own our own stuff, we end up becoming cruel. Now this cruelty. So I'm looking. This gets back to looking now for the evil source when we're looking around racism, sexism, and poverty. There is no evil source. When I look for an evil source, I will find one. And so let's look at racism. For me, there's a history of racism in the United States from day one, right? This history I could easily identify, well, just white people are inherently bad. White people aren't inherently bad. My grandparents, my great-grandparents aren't inherently bad. But the racism that got generated, that is terrible, right? And I'm still benefiting from. My abundance is based on that racism historically. And this abuse of power. So I can be proud of my parents, what they've done for me, what my grandparents have done, and I need to acknowledge that it was built on, this abundance that I have was built on an abuse of power and an unwillingness to provide basics for all and an overfocus on abundance. And so this is very important to recognize that. At the same time, I'm not an inherently evil person. So what do I need to do? I need to own up to the fact that there's gross inequality and that power has been abused and is being abused, and stand against that, stand with those who have been marginalized by my dominant culture, and look to address it and end the cruelty, end the gross inequality, and end the abuse of power, and address the poverty and racism and sexism that in the United States, the culture of which I am a member, has been the primary force since the early history of the United States. So what happens with all this is it leads to poverty, racism, and sexism. Now, if you look back up this chain, there's no sort of evil source here. There is, however, a build of an overfocus on or thinking without and thinking, claiming power without sharing power, abundance for some without basics for all, and all being accountable without having adequate grace. Desmond Tutu wrote a book, No Future Without Forgiveness. We need forgiveness for me, for all of us, for our country, for what has been done in the past, and we need to hold ourselves accountable and move ahead. How do we move ahead from a polarity perspective? First thing is we start from the bottom and work up at this point. We're just reversing the order of these. So the first thing we can do is we can recognize that we need, in our addressing poverty, racism, and sexism, we need to both solve problems and we need to leverage polarities. And when we have a polarity to leverage, we need to make sure we leverage that polarity and we don't see it as a problem to solve. So we bring and with us in this process moving upward. So we bring both of these as a resource. We can solve problems and we can leverage polarities. Okay, so when it gets to claiming power and sharing power, we recognize that we can claim power and share power. We can protect us and we can protect them. And if you think about the relationship between dominant cultures and marginalized cultures anywhere on the planet, in their first voice for power, the claiming power by people who are marginalized. Let's take women's suffrage in the United States. In their effort to gain the vote, which was a claiming power act, when they are claiming power, they're not trying to claim power over men. They're just saying, we want to share power. So their effort to claim power is right within this polarity map. They want to claim power and share power. So we can look to the marginalized to help us appreciate what claiming power and sharing power is like, because they're more likely to be willing to share power than we have been in the past, those of us in the dominant culture. So this is where we can learn. But the point is, we need to both claim power and share power to protect us and to protect them. That's possible. We can protect both. How about providing? We can provide for us and we can provide for all. We can provide wonderful houses for ourselves. We can have our mansions, and we can provide basic housing for everyone. And thinking supports us in doing that. The next thing is, we can hold ourselves accountable for our history and our benefits of that history, and we can provide mercy to ourselves and to others. We don't have to find an evil source to somehow beat up or abuse or lock up. There is no evil source. We can pursue justice to make sure that people are treated equally and fairly, and we can arrive with forgiveness. This is what the truth and reconciliation process is all about, both bringing justice and mercy, truth and reconciliation. So we can move towards equity in quality of life, and respond to poverty and racism and sexism. And a central piece of this is supplementing or thinking with and thinking. So the final comment about this is that and thinking is not a solution to poverty, racism, or sexism, but it's a process requirement. Without supplementing or thinking with and thinking, our most sincere efforts will be radically undermined, and no amount of money, commitment, or alignment will compensate. We need to bring and thinking to the effort of addressing poverty, racism, and sexism. The lack of and thinking is what caused it in the first place. And without it, all we will do is track down some evil sources and then abuse them. Or live in white guilt in the United States, which is not helpful to anyone. Finding an evil source does not help anyone. It's destructive of whoever the evil source is, and also whoever's identifying them as an evil source. Finally, I'd like to quickly share with you how or with and can help us address the climate crisis. When we connect something we value dearly with the environment using the word or, the environment is neglected in the short run, and what we value dearly will suffer in the long run. So let's take a look at this. The polarity of the nation and the environment. In 1997, the United States Senate voted 95-0 not to sign the Kyoto Accord. And because they said it was, quote, not in the national interest. Their fear was that the national interests were being neglected by the Accord, and what they were supporting was, let's take care of the national interests. The assumption is that if you took care of the national interests, if you took care of the environment, you would neglect the national interests. So it ended up with us, in fact, not being able to pay attention to the environmental interests, and we ended up over-focusing on that, so the environmental interests got neglected. So we neglected them in 95. That's what happened, and that is in part what continues to happen. And that is because people are seeing the issue as, do we focus on the nation or on the environment? We could look at this with the family. Do I protect my family or protect the environment? If that's the question, I'm going to end up choosing the family, and I'm going to neglect the environment. The problem is having the or between them. Okay, here we have another polarity stack, and on the top of the left-hand stack, we can see we're focusing on the part of the system, and then we're focusing and we're focusing on the part now, and we're focusing on the whole in the long term. And so it's a combination in a sense of two polarities. Now, in the first polarity, are we going to focus on or and? When we choose or and we bring that to the next three, we're in problem. We create a problem. We're focusing on the part, and we're focusing on the short term. When we do that, when we ask the question, do I focus on family or the environment, and we think short term, we end up neglecting the environment, and that results in neglecting the family and the environment long term. If we focus on the organization or the environment, we end up neglecting the environment and the organization long term. And if we focus on the country to the neglect of the environment, as we did in the Kyoto Protocol, then we end up neglecting the environment and the country long term. What this leads to is more extreme climate change and devastation for future generations. So the family, the organization, the environment all lose by pairing them with the environment with the word or. But we can, if we look at the right-hand column and start at the bottom, we can connect them with and. We can solve problems and leverage polarities. We can protect the family and the environment now, and we can protect the environment and the family long term. We can protect the organization now and the environment now, and we can protect the environment and the organization long term. We can also protect our country and the environment now, and we can protect the environment and the country long term. We just need to add and in connecting these two dimensions, and it will lead to sustainability for family, organization, country, and the environment. So the final statement is that we have a short-term and long-term focus. When we ask the question, should I take care of my family or the environment, we neglect the environment in the short term. Shall I take care of my business or the environment, we neglect the environment in the short term. When we say, should we take care of the country or the environment, we neglect the environment in the short term. We must replace or with and in each of the above polarities because it is in the long-term interest of my family, my business, and my country to address climate change now to preserve a habitat that will support them, humanity, and millions of species in the long run. And thinking will help. Okay, so for part 4, here are some questions for you. How does and thinking provide an alternative to looking for an evil source when addressing poverty, racism, and sexism? What are the 4 polarities that contribute to poverty, racism, and sexism when the word or is used to connect the poles? What might one action step be to gain or maintain the upside of each pole of the 4 polarities? How does or thinking without and thinking contribute to the climate crisis? What are some examples of how and thinking is contributing to addressing the climate crisis? Thank you for your participation in this 4-part series, and thank you, Mia and Chung Judge.
So on behalf of everyone, may I say a big thank you to you, Barry, for all the insights you share in this video and building on top of the first 2 parts that you share in video 38. This video is filled with so much information for me to digest, but I want you to know, Barry, I'm particularly struck by how powerful it could be if more of us really explore the world through the lens you describe in part 4. So thank you for that, and I'm grateful for you taking time out to share your wisdom and your vision with us through this 4-part series. So any information about how to find and connect with Barry and his resources and his biography, it will be at the end of the video. So a huge thank you to you again, Barry, and thank you to the viewer of this video. So may we provoke to do something bigger than who we are in our professional life in the arena of fighting poverty, racism, and sexism in the world. Goodbye. Stay safe.